Welcome to the Therapist Book Club, where two therapists dive into their favorite books and the powerful mental health themes they uncover.
Whether you're here for literary inspiration, therapeutic tools, or just some lighthearted conversation, you've found the right place.
So get cozy and let's dive into the pages together.
All right, welcome back for another episode. We are talking about the book, the memoir, Know My Name, which was written by Chanel Miller, who was the survivor of sexual assault. Really, what's the word? Highly publicized. It was in the news a ton. What was the guy's name? I don't even want to say.
Yeah, Brock Turner.
Brock Turner, yes. And it was very controversial because there was a lot of support for him.
Mm-hmm.
The whole playing out of the story. And so this is her chance to tell her story and the impact that this assault had on her life. So there's big trigger warnings in this podcast, just because we were talking about something very sensitive: sexual assault, trauma, systemic injustice.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is hard for you to listen to, and this is a book that might be challenging to read, don't read it. Don't listen right now until you're in a space where you feel like you can. But we feel like it's really essential for us as therapists to be talking about these issues. So I've read the book. I know Kirsten has not read it yet. But she's done a lot of, she's followed the story and knows.
I'm like part of the book. Yeah, I haven't completed it yet. Partially, I'll say I didn't complete it because it was trigger. I am a survivor of sexual assault, and there was just like a portion where it got a little heavy for me. So that's the people who might be careful of it. I told you, Tiana, this part, it was like it was triggering and frustrating and validating. So it's like a weird intersection. So you really have to be in like the right. So if you've experienced sexual assault, doesn't mean you cannot read this. Because it is interesting. This I think her story is a very normal, common experience with sexual assault versus have you read the Elizabeth Smart story? Hers is really hard to that is such an abnormal. That's not what sexual assault looks like on a day-to-day basis, but man, this book was real and raw. And I'm glad she wrote it. And you could tell she was angry. And I am glad she wrote it that way.
It took her a while to get to anger.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably because of social conditioning to not be the angry person and to just be kind of quiet and calm, and maybe her family of origin conditioning as well. But I think she felt a lot of shame for being so angry. And it was not one of the first emotions that came up in her processing of what happened to her.
I wondered if her her family's culture, so she's Chinese American. I want to say it was her dad that's Chinese and her mom is Caucasian. I might have those swapped, but I wondered if that came into play at all for her. But also I would say it's really normal that women don't report immediately. And even a case like this, they arrested the perpetrator and it took her a minute to come forward. And I thought the part that I really was impressed about too was there's also a really beautiful theme of like sisterhood in there. Her sister, I don't know, could she have come forward? Her sister brought her a lot of strength, I think, in being able to come forward.
Yeah. I think she was also there was some interesting dynamics between coming forward and what this would do to her parents, and wanting to protect her parents from this information and not wanting them to be hurt by her being hurt.
Which is so interesting. And what I'm angry about is, why does she have to feel that way? She is a victim of a crime.
Yeah, what is that? Because that's a common experience.
Yes. Well, I think because we spent so many years shaming and victim, that was a really common legal or like a defense was, well, she dressed provocatively, or she was intoxicated. And there was this episode of Below Deck, which everyone will just kind of know now that I love just dumb reality TV. But it was Below Deck Down Under, and one of the girls was intoxicated, and there was one of the men on board. And I'm not saying this is always men, because men can be victims of sexual assault as well. Just don't happen in this story. And anyway, the chief stew, Aisha, and the chef intervene, and they're talking about it later the next day, because the crew was like split on this. Sorry, I'm on a tangent, but it does make sense. The crew was split on this, of like whether this man should have been let go from the boat, which he was, or whether he shouldn't. And the chef said something really interesting. She's like, a woman should be able to stand in the middle of the room drunk and naked and not be raped. Like, that's not consent. Same for men. And I was like, oh, I know that is going to be jarring for some people to hear. But you should be able to go to someone's house and Netflix and chill without being raped. You should be able to go to a party
Mhm.
and get drunk and not be raped. Like, you should be able to just walk to your car. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, you should be able to live your childhood without being raped. Like, these are not things that are consent. And good for her, because the law of consent, or the laws around this was changed because this gal in California, because she spoke up, and they changed the way that rape was defined based on her memoir and her speaking out. Um, and so I'm like, awesome, good for her. I I love the title of this book, right?
Mhm.
Because she was known as Emily Doe for a long time. And I think she really wanted to put a face to, like, but actually I'm a person. Um, yeah, so tell us more, because there's so much in this book that's so like will just piss you off.
I mean, there was so much like
Well, tell us about the investigation. Do you remember that? The police, they kept so much from her.
the parts that stand out to me on that was like the violation that she felt going in to be assessed to
Mhm.
like prove that she had been assaulted was so violating and like harmful. And she was so dissociated at that point. Like, but that was jarring to me. I don't remember too much about the police part of it, but like her just going into the hospital to have like the rape test done and stuff and like taking her clothes and I don't know. How much are we
Well,
like re-traumatizing people in
right.
this?
Because at the time she was also still drunk,
Yeah.
which she, whether you believe if she should have been intoxicated or not, one thing that was interesting and was a big piece of the case, like, it's just so interesting, this case should have been a slam freaking dunk. They had witnesses, like,
Mhm.
two students were cycling,
Mhm.
and she was behind, they were like behind a dumpster, something like that.
Yeah.
Something was happening suspicious enough that these two people got off their but like in a split second, saw it,
Yeah.
got off the bike, saw that she was unconscious,
Mhm.
and held him while they called the cops, because in that split second they knew this was wrong.
Right.
So
There
they
was no
had
question.
witnesses.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, and we're always like, I think as the society at large loves to blame the victim, and they love to question the victim and wonder why it takes so long. This book is going to tell you why we don't report, why we don't, and like, um, so they had witnesses. They assessed her intoxication level at the hospital, and it was like a 0.21 or something like that. I just looked, it's a 0.2 something. So extremely intoxicated. She doesn't have any memory from it and wakes up like basically in the hospital. um there's like, I mean, like, to me, I'm like, Kyle, he doesn't deny it.
Yeah.
He has her DNA under his nails. They have a rape kit done that shows like some pretty significant injury. It should have been an open and shut case. Like this this boy made a bad decision.
And the thing that pisses me off about this story is that this is like status quo.
We hear these stories all the time in our therapy offices, right?
Yeah.
But so here's the thing. I don't see the same reactions. Like if you have been physically assaulted, my clients that come in here and have been physically assaulted don't say, well, maybe I didn't tell them not to. Maybe I didn't say no. No, they're like, he should never have put his hands on me, or she should have never put her hands on me, right? Like, if you have been sexually assaulted, the mind F that happens is that you hear society around you have these like perceived, like, maybe I didn't say no. The law of consent is that you say yes.
Yeah.
It's not that you say no.
Why does the system protect the perpetrator?
Well, that's my thing. I don't know why. But I'm like, I wish there was, okay, so we have victim services, we have victim advocates. And I will actually say, um, I don't know, I didn't know this until I watched or listened to a different podcast. Actually, Joe Biden created our victim advocacy programs back in the 90s. And I was like, the 90s? We haven't, like, victim advocates weren't around. That's too long of a time without victim advocates,
Yes.
Anyway, so the victim advocacy program came through, and it's to protect the victim. And I heard somebody do a training. Her name is Nubia Pena. She's somewhere in our governor's office right now, but and she was saying it is the criminal justice system. It is for criminals. It is not for the victim. It is a system that is created to make sure that the law is followed, because we actually do, I think in a society we do believe in the dignity and worth of humans, and that we should all have rights. It is created to make sure, like, that's why they have a defense attorney, to make sure that their rights are followed as a
So that we
human
don't
being.
so that we don't potentially incriminate somebody who's not a criminal.
Well, it could be that. And so we're not like giving harsh sentence, or like, because think about that implication. If a judge can just give any sentence willy-nilly or whatever, right? So we've created laws to protect in that way. um After this case, and um after this case, this case is so absurd, but after this case, California did pass a law that any felony sexual assault holds a minimum of 3 years.
Yeah, because he was only sentenced to like 6 months.
For 2 felony assaults and a
In
bunch of
county
other
jail,
charges.
just in county jail too.
County jail, and he only served 3 months.
I think this is a story of gender discrimination
Privilege.
and privilege and money
Yes.
and
Oh, happy.
celebrate.
Anyone not watching the podcast will not know what just happened. So
Boom,
go
give us some
watch
balloons. I
It's
think
really the wrong time for those balloons too.
this is a story of much more than, obviously it's about the justice system failing this poor girl, but it's a demonstration of our society's failures at large.
Totally. Because she did everything right. Do you know what I'm like? That's a good for her. And I sometimes am like, so she did everything right. She wrote a beautiful victim impact statement. And if you are yes, Joe Biden read that statement. Like, it was read in Congress. Like, she has an amazing talent for writing and expressing herself. And if she can't get justice, who can? Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, to me, I'm like, what if you were somebody who like writing just isn't like your jam, or you don't express yourself in that way? Or what if you're a vulnerable adult who has like disability and you don't have that ability to do? I think she did report pretty quickly, which I think people criticize when you come like remember when Judge Kavanaugh, his victim was from like the 80s and she came out then and everyone's like, what the heck? Like she just wants clout or whatever. That's actually pretty common that things go on because look at what
Yes,
happens.
here. Yes.
So some of the ways that we shamed her, that our criminal justice system was the way lawyers were allowed to shame her was they talked a lot about her intoxication level and that the intoxication level and she didn't have memory. And so he got to frame the story because she didn't have memory of it. He his level of intoxication was high, but it was half of hers. And he denies ever losing memory. I think that's really important because it wasn't like he was blackout and she was blackout. Like he wasn't. Um
Supposedly.
and even based on his testimony, he wasn't blacked
Yeah.
out. He retained memory. Um the laws, I thought it was so fascinating. If you look at his original charges and what he was found guilty on, they so in the hospital they call or an expert. They brought in a like the state because the state had this girl that was amazing and so intelligent and actively working on this. The state had a really great case. They brought in an expert witness who said her level of intoxication would be equivalent to a stage 11 out of 15 coma.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
I don't know if it was in there. This
It
is like
wasn't in
my
the
own
book.
deep dive on this because actually this I will say this did trigger me a little bit and I had to really do some Wikipediaing because
Yeah.
and so they do talk about his testimony that way and I was like that. So okay, so if you read the charges, they are separated out by intoxicated versus like there's some that are like rape of an intoxicated person and then just like sexual assault. Isn't that interesting that we have different laws for people who, different charges for people who are intoxicated versus, and I wish, I don't know, to me, I'm like, that minimizes it, in my
It's
opinion.
like putting it on a rating scale. Like it wasn't as bad as this, so it shouldn't be like rape is rape.
Totally.
Why does there need to be varying degrees of rape?
I love when
How is
they,
this rape worse than this rape?
yeah. Like, remember with like statutory, they'll talk about underage.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about children.
Yeah.
Let's stop. We
Let's call
love,
it what it is.
yes, but I think it's ways we use this language to like minimize or like
Yeah.
soften.
Mhm.
But I'm like, the reality is statutory rape is sexual assault of a child.
Yeah.
Like, let's just say what it is.
Mhm.
But so that's the part that was so interesting. So not to get too far on a rant here, but I think this is a great read for therapists working in the sexual assault
Yeah.
to and for anybody who has ever said, well, why didn't they just report it?
Yep.
This is just such a good read because
Yes.
this is a how this played out is just how it's such a common experience.
It's the fear of anybody who's been assaulted in
Yeah,
this.
they won't believe me.
Yes.
And if you have that mind f going on that like I don't know if I believe me, you know what I'm saying, like because did I say no enough or did I yeah, you know what I'm saying, like then it's hard. So here's how our brain works. All of this stuff becomes evidence for or against. Our brain loves to categorize, lives to like label it.
Make sense of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you're already trying to make sense of it and you're like parasympathetic and sympathetic systems are going, right? How the police respond or how the people around you respond is going to weigh very heavily on how that person heals from this because if you are questioning, like there just is something so deeply violating about sexual assault that it like messes with your worthiness. There's so much shame in there. It's intimate, it's vulnerable. And so it creates that, like every sexual assault victim that I or survivor that I've worked with EMDR has a negative cognition of like, I am shameful, I'm dirty, I'm broken, right? I'm unworthy in some way. And we have to like it takes a while to get them to say, this wasn't my fault. That is normal and common. And that is that voice in your head that society has put in there is hard to overcome to report.
Yeah, and that negative cognition doesn't come just because you were assaulted. That comes because of the conditioning that society has had on your brain from a very early age. And seeing the results of other women being treated in this way. If
Mm-hmm.
I get myself raped, which is so absurd to even say, then something must be wrong with me. That doesn't come just that belief doesn't come out of nowhere. That's like ingrained in you from something else.
Okay, I'm just gonna say it. I'm getting emotional because I'm like, that is so sad.
It is.
That's so sad to me that we have children that we're not protecting.
Yeah.
And it just screws up their whole life. You know, like this book, you know, she talks about like and I, you know, she is like a spokeswoman, I would say, for all of us. She does this so wonderfully. But this is her whole life. Like she's known by this now, right? Like, and it wasn't her fault. And I think there's just something I truly believe there's not a lot more evil than sexual assault,
Yeah.
because of the lasting impact. It impacts your relationships, it impacts sexuality, and it limits you. Like I just think it's just the most unfair thing, right? That like now we have clients who come in and have to do some of the hardest work that's out there and the deepest things is out there, and it's not their fault and it's not fair. And who is protecting? Like we didn't have victim services until 1990 whatever. I think it was 96 or something like that.
And I think that's to the point, to my point of like when you are sexually assaulted, the trauma of that doesn't start in that moment. If you already have that belief of I'm not going to be believed, I'm not going to be trusted, I'm not going to be protected, because you've witnessed society not protecting women.
Yeah.
You've witnessed it your whole life.
But think about that too. That's such a good point. So then every time that you have sex with maybe like a loving partner, it can feel re-traumatizing because of yeah, just because of like the physical symptoms and whatever. And like it's heavy to bear. And I would be really interested to hear from her. Maybe correct me if she, I don't feel like she talks about this in the book, but I would love to hear from her of like, what does she think? Like, what's a future consideration for our country? Like if you anything could change, what would you do? Like what does she recommend that we could be doing differently that would like help? Does
I
she
can't
cover
remember.
that in the book? I don't feel like she does.
I think probably just like the power of your voice, because like and not being invisible and not allowing people to keep you invisible. And like, so I don't know if I don't remember if she makes any like suggestions for society at large, but more towards the people who've survived assault and
Yeah.
like, don't be quiet. I know that this is hell and that it's not going to feel like anything is changing, but speaking out is for you, and like allowing yourself to have a voice is the most important thing. That's kind of the takeaway I got, is like she was speaking to other victims, not necessarily to like survivor, or not necessarily to society.
To be fair, tons of laws changed after this. So maybe that is kind of like the change. I think our laws of consent don't go far enough. Like I think sexual assault should just be sexual assault. Like I guess there could be degrees, like, but I wish they would do sexual assault in the way they do domestic violence, that there can be, or assault, there could be aggravating factors. Like we have a base charge, and then aggravating factors would be unconsciousness or somebody being a child, and that we don't have like statutory rape and
Yeah.
unconscious rape, or do you know what I'm saying? Like I wish we just
Things
had
like
rape,
that would escalate it. Yeah.
right, versus minimize it or allow people
Yeah.
this defense of minimizing, you know?
Okay, I did a quick search. She does call out for harsher penalties for sexual violence, saying that his sentencing was a complete failure of the system.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about judicial bias, that the judge gave the guy a more lenient sentence because of how he was portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she emphasizes that survivors don't owe the world a perfect victim narrative, that just because she was drunk, just because, like, she doesn't have to be perfect to not get
Yeah.
assaulted. More support for survivors in the system, and then teaching. And oh, she does a lot of like speaking and public speaking things about rape culture in colleges and in the media, and like trying to work against all of that stuff.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. Because the fraternity like came into play too. That oh, and that reminds me too. When I did some research, I can't remember if she says no, she does talk about this in the book. He had complaints filed against him prior to this, which I will say it is not normal behavior that he would get drunk one time and act outside of his like moral code or whatever. Typically you will have people, when you look at their case, he did have,
Escalating
yeah,
behaviors.
he was acting inappropriate at the party prior with her sister. And yeah, he did show an escalation of his behavior. There was prior complaints involved with his, conduct. And in fraternities, often that's maybe a culture that's
Mhm.
there, or that's what they're trying to clean up. There could be. So anyway, there is some of that too. That's like this wasn't truly the isolated incident that everybody's trying to point out. Um, I
And
thought
how
this.
how often is it an isolated event?
I know. I was like, not. I never. I don't know. And there was like, he had like a long history of. There was lots of history of substance abuse, but like that didn't play out when they talked about him. And to me, I'm like, okay, so substance abuse could have caused this behavior, but whose problem is that?
Yeah.
Like that's on him. Yep. And when you are under the influence and you have bad behavior, like a criminal behavior, you still are at fault.
Accountable. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I definitely think this was a case of white male privilege, that he looked like what the good guys look like, he was a young boy, 19
The
years.
guy that people would should be afraid of in the forest instead of a bear. Have you heard that? Like,
Yes.
who are you more afraid of, the guy or the bear?
Yes. Yeah, but so um I think it's a really honest portrayal. I think it's great to look at the dynamics of court involvement. And I just want to say, and I bet she would say this too, I would join with her in this, that sexual assault doesn't define my life anymore. Like nobody looks at me as like the girl that was sexually assaulted. Maybe it does for her a little bit more, but she is using that as the platform to speak out, I think there's hope in recovery. The fact that she can go out and tell her story so much tells me that there's some recovery that has happened, that she's able to do that safely and, not be traumatized each time.
From what after I read this book, I did a little like Instagram search of her, and she's become quite the artist and has like a big art platform
Oh,
now.
I had heard that too. Yeah.
So that's kind of cool that this kind of this pain opened up other doors for, I'm sure art has been healing for her as well. And
Hmm.
yeah,
And I love her. I think the point she tries to make is, um, you shouldn't have to feel shame if this happens to you. The same way, like if you were the victim of a carjacking or a robbery, burglary, you wouldn't blame yourself, and you don't have to for this either.
Yeah, I give this book a 5 out of 5. It's a hard read. It's a hard read. She does such a beautiful job of showing like that this healing process she went through was not linear and wasn't like a straightforward like I'm going to work through it and get better. It was like it like wobbled around all over the place throughout the story, and I'm sure still impacts her to this day. But
Don't you think this could be such a good part of uh like trauma courses that therapists take? This could be a really good memoir to be included in those courses for our up and coming therapists.
or even macro level courses about like the justice system, how the system operates and how it fails,
Mm,
and like if you're interested in macro level work on how you can improve the system to better support victims or survivors.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an important read. And I think I thank her for her service in writing this and the change that she's brought about by being brave. Well, I don't even want to say brave because I think you can be brave and not speak up too, but by being willing to take this on or being in a place or having the resilience or whatever it is that brings her here. Um, in a way, I just want to send out that thank you to her that she took this on, because I think it can bring a lot of advocacy. It's brought a lot of advocacy, it can bring some healing to people, um, and we need people to speak up.
Yeah, it's like a hard balance of like I don't ever want to be the person that says you should speak up and say something that you're not ready to say, or file charges when you're not ready to file. Like I don't want to be the person who makes that decision, but I'm glad that she did.
I always think about it this way: is there there's going to be reasons, and it's not a worthiness issue. Sometimes it's just like she had a lot of her family supported her. She had a lot of support. Um, and I always think about that, like I love fighting the school system, and some of that is like my personality. I can handle them not liking me, and because of that, I can handle being the one to fight.
Right.
And I think for her, there's something about her situation that meant she could handle taking that on. And there's other situations where people are not in that place where they can do that, and that is actually brave for them to say, I
Not doing it.
can't do that right now. Yeah, it doesn't take away from their story, whatever. It's yeah, for there's some life circumstances or personality or something in there that allowed her to be able to speak in this way. She has some creative talent that I think helped her. She could write in this way.
Mhm.
And if you feel like you cannot speak up or you cannot report, I think sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do is like I mentally cannot take that on.
And I think as therapists supporting our clients through this is like trusting that they know what's best for them.
Here's how I have that discussion just for other people. I've had that discussion a lot, and I'll say, is this something you want to report?
Mhm.
And if they and I tell them, I'm like, there's no right or wrong answer here. If this is something you want to report, I will support you all the way. If this is something you don't want to support, I mean, sorry, report, I will support you all the way. I just want you to know that you have a choice,
Mhm.
and that you'll like I'm here for you to support whatever choice that you make. Um, and I think even being sometimes people want to support and I'm sorry, I keep switching up those words. Report, and they don't know how. They don't know what services they have out there to support them through that. And so sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, but I'm scared," and I'll say, "Let's talk about,
Yeah.
here in Layton, we do have an advocacy program. We have a domestic violence shelter that helps people with who are victims of this kind of crime. Um, and as a therapist, there's a lot I can do to help as well. Um, and I would say it's about 50-50 people who say, yeah, I want to actually I bet it's like 60-40 of people who choose not to report versus report. And I do not think you are like, this is what I say, you can heal without reporting.
Yep.
And it is not your responsibility. You know how everyone's like, oh, you have to report because you'll save so many
Hold them
people.
accountable.
That
Yeah.
is not your responsibility. That is that perpetrator's responsibility to not perpetrate to save all the people.
Yeah.
That is not on your shoulders. That's still, to me, I'm like, I think that is still a shaming statement.
It's putting the onus on the victim.
Right. We're saying the victim, you could have done something. And so to me, I'm like, you are not responsible for that. You can just focus on your healing
Yeah.
and you can change your mind anytime you want to.
What would you say are the reasons why that you come across the reasons why people want to report?
I think it's because they will feel that unfairness.
Like some justice is
Yeah,
if I report.
I think that's what they'll feel in it is it's not, yeah, that they are getting away with something or, and I think it's they believe too much in the system.
Yeah.
And
That it's gonna solve it.
that's how they're gonna feel. They're
Yeah.
like that's how they're gonna get their justice, right? Somebody's gonna stand up for them, and yeah, it's I just and I will say to people like I'm this is a bias a little bit, but also remember it's the criminal justice system, so let's not tie our healing into that system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just thinking like even the victim is such an afterthought in this. Like we first before you hear like the victim statement, we have first heard the defense side.
Well, it's
You
because
know?
the system is designed to like you're not guilty until you're proven guilty,
Mhm.
right?
I know, and it's tricky because I'm like, yes, yes.
No.
But in a way, it's like, and it's uncommon that people are like, I think, man, it's not an everyday thing that innocent people are, I don't know. I'm like, people don't, I have never been accused of a crime in my life.
Right?
I think that's uncommon
Yeah.
unless you have participated in criminal behavior.
Yeah.
So I don't
And
know. It's
when
tricky.
there's an allegation made, why isn't it taken seriously?
Hmm. Understand there's a fine line. Um, yeah, if this book kind of reminded me a little bit of the documentary by and we're almost out of time, but it reminded me of the documentary that USA Gymnast of like the USA Gymnastics.
With the coach.
Yes, and there was something really powerful in that one where the victims were kind of given 100 people came and made a victim statement.
That's crazy.
That is crazy that went on that one. That's a whole other story, but yeah, it's a fine balance here. I think this could be a book that's part of curriculum for therapists. So if you haven't read it, I think you should. And I think for therapists, if you are a social worker, it is part of our code of ethics that we would get involved and be active in our communities. Um, Social justice is a big part of social workers. Um, I think it should be of all whatever, but it is in our social justice is deep in our code of ethics and is deep in our history as social workers. And if your clients, like to me, I'm like, I feel an obligation to speak up because my clients are vulnerable and they like to me, I'm like, I want to take that off their plates. You focus on healing and I will raise hell.
Well, I think about system as a social worker, I can't help but think about systems. But as individuals, we live within systems. If our systems are broken and harming us, there's a limit to how much healing we can possibly do if
And
we are continually being harmed by the systems in which we live. And
that's
so
such
if
a
the
good point.
systems are not being changed, you will keep getting harmed.
You know what? One thing people should, I'm like, if you want to experience wrath, piss a social worker off.
We will never stop.
I'm like, it's so true though. Any social worker listening to this, I'm like, I don't, just social justice is just in us. Yeah.
And systems are can be smaller than the justice system. Like systems are families too. And if you're an individual in a family that is causing harm, how much like you're still in that system that is hurting you until you can get out of the system. And we can't get out of our system in America. We are in our system. So how
Mhm.
do we fix it and make it less harmful?
Yeah. So we're at the end.
Okay.
I hope you, like everybody listening, has a takeaway. I hope we've motivated therapists to get out there and start speaking. If you're
I
calling
think this is the
to
most
speak
like
again.
animated we've been.
I love it. Good for us.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in and listening to us rant.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Therapist Book Club. We hope today's conversation inspired you to explore new stories and perspectives.
Don't forget to follow us for more episodes, share your favorite books with us, and join the conversation on how books and mental health connect on our social media channels.
Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, your story matters.